Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to the video. This is going to be video number 7 of the Baja front suspension build. In this video, we're going to be installing the bump stops and the limit straps. So like I usually do, before we jump into actually working on the chassis, let me bring you up to speed as to what I've been doing so far, because it's been a couple of weeks since the last video. So in the last video, video 6, I did the upper control arm. And if you remember, when I was done with that upper control arm, I wasn't actually 100% happy with how it looked, just aesthetically. So I did make some changes to that. Let me take my stick out here and drop this down a little bit. So in the last video, this is the same control arm, but the opening in here and here was not as big. What I actually did is I made the sides of this control arm the same width as the lower control arm, just by opening all this and giving it a little bit more of a cutout here. And what that did is it just gives the upper control arm a little bit of symmetry with the lower control arm, even though they're both completely different. Just having the same width here kind of makes them look the same. I know this is just an aesthetics thing, but it was really bothering me that they looked so different. So I did make that change. It will take a little bit of strength away from that upper control arm, but you know, I think it'll be okay. And if it doesn't, if it fails, I'll remake one that's stronger. So then once I got that sorted out, then I started working on the bump stops, and I've got this one here installed, and I have the limit strap installed. It's actually tight right now, holding it up. I actually did this a couple of different times, a couple of different ways. I tried doing it boxed, that didn't work. I tried having the limit strap mounted on the side of the bump stop here. That didn't work. Originally I wanted the limit strap connected to the lower control arm, because with having it on the upper control arm, you know, when it actually stops the suspension, it has to go through the spindle before it gets to the shock absorber and the springs, and that's the way I would have rather done it. But with the configuration of everything and with how much this suspension comes up, where I have it here was really just the best and kind of the only way that I could do it. So I did add these cross braces here. I added that on both sides. These are obviously to stiffen this up, but it also gives me a nice tie-in point for the connection point of the limit strap at the top. Then the limit strap down here just has a little tab that welds onto the upper control arm. Pretty simple once you have the design all figured out. I did add an 1/8 inch plate right here where it contacts the control arm, and I also added an 1/8 inch bracing here that runs up to here just to add some strength to the lower control arm as to where the bump stop's going to impact that. I did fabricate and make everything for this side because I was kind of struggling with that, so I wanted to get all that figured out before I tried to do a video. So if we come over to this side, I don't have the upper control arm yet, so I won't be able to tie in the limit strap. But when I was making the other side, and I've done this before, as I was making the other side, I make all the pieces kind of twice, knowing that I'll need them for this side. So I've got, like, this is the piece for the top of the limit strap. This is the tab for the limit strap to tie into the upper control arm. This is just some bracing for the bump stop. Here's the bump stop, and I've already got it mocked up a little bit for the first piece here. And I have both of the, well, I just undid the other side, but I've got this side mocked up in the full compression location, and I have already tacked on the 1/8 inch plate for the bump stop to impact, and then the bracing piece here to add a little bit of strength, you know, where the bump stop is going to impact the lower control arm. Whether or not this will all be strong enough, you know, we'll see once I actually get it out on the trails and can beat around on it a little bit. But I'm feeling pretty good with this setup for right now. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to put all the pieces in here and get the bump stop going. I'll try to go over with you how I figure out the angle of the bump stop here, and I'll tack everything in place. One thing that's going to be a little bit different here is I do have a new welder. This is a Miller, what is it, a Millermatic 211. Typically when I do this, I use my TIG welder to tack everything together and to solid weld it. What I'm going to try doing on here today is I'm going to do my tacks with the Miller. I'm still going to solid weld it with the TIG, but just to keep things faster and easier, I'm going to try and just do some real fast tacks with the Miller. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to start chasing down what I call fixed points. When you're trying to duplicate something like this to the other side of your chassis, even though this chassis itself is very similar from side to side, especially because it's been built off of a computer program and it's been built off of a very accurate base, there's still going to be some differences from side to side no matter what, especially when you take into account I'm dealing with the chassis, the lower control arm, and the shock absorber. So the first thing I want to do is go after the low-hanging fruit, or the fixed points, whatever you want to call it. It's the easy points that you can go after to duplicate the other side. One of those is the very first piece that I put on this bump stop canister is at a 90 degree. And I purposely did that because a 90 degree is easy to duplicate with this magnet. So I've got this clamped on here, which puts me right at a 90 degree, and I know that I'm 1/4 of an inch off the bottom because that's exactly what I did on the other side. So this is my fixed point. This is the first point that I know that I can duplicate pretty easily with the other side. The only thing I need to figure out is how far around this bump stop canister it needs to be. And so I'm just going to figure that out, and then I'm going to put some tacks on here, and this will be my first point in this setup. Now another thing that I've done is I've got my square clamped onto the chassis here, and I took this height right off of the other side. So when I take this piece and just rest it on the top of my square here, I'll know that I'm at the exact same elevation here as I am on the other side. So if I set it up on my pad and gently let it rest onto the square, and then I'm just going to eyeball this right now because all I'm looking to do is make sure that I've got this set up so that the canister is basically facing out this way with the bolts out towards me. And I want to rotate it a little bit because I feel like the bolts are a little bit too far forward. So just by sliding the magnet forward here, it's easier said than done. And then I'll just double check right before I tack this that that's still at a 1/4 inch. And then put it in the same location. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. The copes on this piece look good. The piece looks pretty good, and the bolts are facing right out to the side. So now I'm going to take this piece and I'm just going to put 3 little tacks on here so that I can do away with the magnet and start mocking it up in other locations. Okay guys, now we're jumping forward a little bit here. This piece is tacked on with the MIG welder. I don't know how I like that. The tacks are kind of big and ugly, but I'll worry about that later. What I have done since then, and the reason I didn't record this is because it took a long time, is this is a foam board cutout of the exact profile on the other side. So if I take this piece of foam board and if I run around to the other side, it fits perfectly right in here. That's how I'm going to transfer the dimensions for this piece right over to the other side. So I take that piece of foam board, run over here with it, and put it in here like I did. Then I take this top piece and I just set it up there, and it fits pretty good. There's little gaps here and there, but I'm not worried about those. I'm going to just tack it in place, laying on top of this foam board, because that'll make my dimensions the same as the other side. And I'm trying to keep this as symmetrical as possible. So in addition to that, and keeping this elevation the same as the other side, then I have my other piece, which is right here, and I'm not gonna actually clamp this in place yet, but just kind of rough holding it up. It seems like that is going to fit just fine, so I'm happy with that. And then you can see I've got just a little piece of aluminum here clamped up here, and I'm using that just to put pressure on here as I've needed to adjust this in and out this way. And I've been sliding this back and forth and in and out to get it to match up with the other side. So right now I have the bump stop perfectly straight up and down right on the side of the control arm. And then on the inside here, I've got a protractor here which is set to 96 degrees, because that's the degrees that I want this bump stop at when the control arm is at full compression. So one of the dimensions that I've been double checking is that with this bump stop right where it is at 96 degrees, which it is. And that's very important, because I've carefully figured out the angles that this needs to be at, so that when it's at its mid-stroke, it's perfectly 90 degrees to the control arm. And I'll show you that once I have this all tacked in place. So I'm really happy with this right now. I'm going to run around and just kind of eyeball check everything one more time. And then I'm going to tack this piece in place. And then as soon as I have this in place, I'm going to size up that piece right here. And then I'll tack it in place if everything looks good with that. Okay, now I've got those pieces tacked in. It's nice and solid at this point. My dimensions are good here. This piece then fit in there real nice. Keep in mind, when I made these three pieces, actually when I made all these pieces, I made them at the same time that I was making the pieces for the other side. And once I had a piece for the other side, like it took me a little bit over a week to come up with all the dimensions and all the copes and everything for this side. That's why this video is so late. There's an incredible amount of time in this, and I also tried to do it a couple different ways that didn't work. So there's a boatload of time in this. And when I was doing this, when I was coming up with my final design, I was duplicating these pieces. So I made one of these. I just reversed the offsets of the copes for this piece, and this piece, knowing that when I came over to the other side here, since the chassis and the lower control arm is pretty symmetrical, I was pretty sure that if I just duplicated everything, it would work out pretty good. And so far it has. There's been a little bit of gaps, but nothing that I can't work with. So I was able to just double check all of my measurements and put these pieces in the right place, and then just tack them in position. So far that's worked out pretty well. Now what I need to do is tack the holder for the limiting strap up here. And the way I'm going to do that is just like everything else here. I've already made the part. And when I tacked it onto this side, you know, I had to calculate or figure out, not calculate, I had to figure out the angle this way so that when it drops, it's in line with the limit strap on the control arm. So I had to figure out what this angle was, and to do that I just made this little bracket here and clamped it to that when I tacked it. So I'm just going to take this bracket over to the other side here, and I'm going to clamp it into place, center the piece on there, I've already got my offset. You see that little black line right there. I want that to be right in the middle of this tube, and then I'm going to tack that in place. All right, now we got our limiting strap all tacked in place, and we got our little holder ready to go there. Unfortunately, I do not have the upper control arm for this side made yet. I'm hoping to work on that later on today. When that does get fabbed up, then I've got this little bracket here that will get tacked to the upper control arm, just like I did on this one here. And this will hold the other end of the limiting strap. Look at that. That's crazy how at full compression how high that comes up. You can see it almost comes into contact with the limiting strap. That's nuts. We got everything tacked in here. I'm happy with how everything came out. It was quick and easy because I had done all of the legwork on the other side. All we had to do on this side is make sure that we kept everything symmetrical like we did. Let's cycle the suspension because I want to make sure that the angles are correct on this bump stop, and I want to show you why I'm paying such close attention to the angle of that bump stop. All right, now if you guys look, this bump stop right now is not at 90 degrees with the lower control arm, and that's because the bump stop is traveling straight up and down, but the lower control arm is actually swinging on an arc because it's got a pivot point, obviously. So I don't want it so that at full compression this is at 90 degrees, because then at its contact point, because these are 4-inch travel bump stops, it's going to be at a pretty harsh angle. And when that control arm comes into contact with the bump stop, you want to alleviate that angle as much as possible. So what I like to do is I like to set it up so that at 2 inches, which is my mid-stroke, I'm at as close to 90 degrees as I can. And then when I'm at full compression, I'll be a little bit over 90, and when I am at first contact, I'll be a little bit under 90, but that's the best that I can get. So as it sits right now at full compression, I should be 96 degrees. Damn, look at that, that's crazy. I didn't even manipulate that. So 96 degrees. So at full compression, this is at 96 degrees. Now let's measure what it is at first contact. So if we drop the arm a little bit here, and pull this out, and then take the arm up just until it makes contact. And then if I get my angle again, man, that's really going to be hard to check. Let's see. So at first contact, I'm at, what is that? 82.2 degrees. According to my calculations, I should have been at 83. I'm at 82.2. I'm perfectly fine with that. And now when we go to mid-stroke, we should be at, my calcs say I'm coming in at 89.5, but hopefully that's right around 90 degrees. And honestly, I'm just going to guess at that. I'm going to guess that's about 2 inches. So if I take this up to contact, and then if I measure my angle again, alright, so I'm coming up at 88.5, so let's call that 89 degrees. And I wanted to be at 90, but you know, I'll take 88.5. That should work. But anyways, if you guys can see, you know, when this first comes into contact, and then as the arm comes up, you want to alleviate that angle because there is a little bit of slippage as this goes through its motion. And right here and now, the slippage is fine. But when this is actually hitting real fast and this is putting up resistance, it's going to be a lot harder for that to slide. So you want to set it up like I did so that you can alleviate that as much as possible. Alright guys, that's it for this video. It's becoming so busy looking up here, but it's cool because it's everything that's up here's got a purpose, and so far I'm really happy with how everything's coming out. I'm really hoping that on the trail it performs as well as I'm hoping it does, but I don't know. We'll see when we actually get to that point. The next thing that we'll be doing is the rear suspension. I can't do the rear suspension until I have the rear transaxle, but fear not, I have ordered the rear transaxle, and when it shows up, we will dive headfirst into the rear suspension. But before we get to that point, we'll get this front suspension a little bit more finished, and I've also ordered some seats for in here. We'll start doing a little bit of cockpit work as well, as far as getting the seat in there, getting some cutting brakes in there, and figuring out where we're going to put the pedal assembly and all that stuff. So anyways guys, that's it for the front suspension build here. Finally got my bump stops in, got my limit straps in. Obviously this isn't completely finished yet because I still have to do the upper control arm and do a whole bunch more welding. But as far as figuring out my placements and getting things tacked in place, I'm good to go on this. Still super excited seeing everything come together. I'm happy with the fitment and everything at this point. I'm really hoping that it performs as well as at least it looks at this point. Who can tell? We'll find out when we actually get it on the trail. But either way guys, thanks for watching the video. I hope it's helping you with your builds, getting you out into the shop, garage, whatever, working on whatever you have. And I hope to see you on the next video. Take care.